And joining me now for an exclusive interview is former United States Special Representative for Ukraine negotiations, Kurt Volker. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Big news out today. Donald Trump says an additional 5,000 troops will head to Poland. This comes after an extended back and forth. Is this a relief for Poland, for NATO's eastern flank, or is it a continuation of what we've seen?
It's a continuation of the unpredictability, and that's what's troubling. It would be nice to have a clear commitment, a clear strategy, consultations about what this all means, so that we create some sort of certainty for not only ourselves, but in presenting that to Russia, that they need to know that there is clarity and commitment here. So that's what's troubling about all this back and forth. But of course, the idea of increasing a U.S. presence in Poland, if that indeed is what happens, we don't still know exactly.
As you rightly point out, uncertain.
Yeah, it's only today. And it's not even 3 p.m. yet, so we have to see where this goes. But of course, that was good. Poland is central to security in Europe generally, security of NATO. It is central to the effort to provide support to Ukraine. So it could be a very good thing, but we have to see how this plays out. But I would really like us to see. I would really like to see us have more clarity and consistency and strategy in what we're doing.
You mentioned Russia. How damaging is this kind of uncertainty to the unity of NATO, to the unity of NATO's eastern flank, and is it a gift for Vladimir Putin?
Well, look, deterrence consists of two components: capabilities and will. Does your adversary believe that you have the capabilities and the will to use them that would make an attack fruitless and not worth trying? And right now, we're okay on capabilities. Poland has, vast defense spending as a NATO member, close to 5%. We have great U.S. military capabilities. So I think Putin sees that there are real capabilities there. But every time we have a spat over tariffs, every time we threaten to annex Greenland, every time we call Canada the 51st state, every time Chancellor Merz says Trump is humiliated, these all contribute to a display of disunity within NATO, which I think causes Putin to wonder, do we really have the will to fight together and push back if we have to? So I think that's what's damaging, is that we are not presenting the most credible deterrent that we should.
What is your answer to that personally? What is your gut feeling? Does America have the will that if Russia, let's say it's not, let's sort of set up a situation where it's not a full-scale invasion of NATO's eastern flank, but perhaps an incursion into the Baltics, as has been discussed.
Right.
Does America really come to their aid?
Yeah, so this is a very difficult and a very important question. First thing to say is that the United States is much more than only President Trump. So President Trump might have doubts about what we should do. Say, do we really want to escalate? Do we want to get into a war with Russia? But you're going to have the American public, the Congress, the Senate, both political parties insisting that the United States live up to its obligations under the NATO treaty and recognizing that security in Europe is vital to security of the United States. So there would be pressure within the U.S. to respond. But then you also make part of your question, what if it's not a full-scale invasion? Exactly. What if it is just a little bit here? And here I worry not only about the United States, but also most European NATO allies, particularly West European NATO allies, Southern European NATO allies, who will say, well, we don't really want to escalate the situation. Let's just stop here. Let's have dialogue. And that's a very slippery slope, because if we do that once, Putin can test it again. And if we do it again, he'll keep testing and he'll see, can he get away with really breaking the idea of Article 5, breaking the idea of defending every inch of NATO territory. So I think that is something that we need to be focused on. We need to be demonstrating we have the capability to defend NATO territory and the will to do so. And in that context, I think the multinational deployments in the Baltic states, I think the announced additional deployment to Poland, these are good things if we get the messaging right and convey to Putin a sense of resolve.
I guess the question is, does NATO risk being a bit of a lame duck? and simply not living up to the promises, the alliances that have been sustained and built for so many years, and in a sort of couple of years it feels like it might be going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, I think the lame duck question really revolves around the capabilities of European NATO allies. They have been
will too, right? As you rightly
and
pointed.
will. But let's start with the capabilities, because when you say a lame duck, it means, okay, you really can't do what you say you're going to do. And here, I think there has been a great underinvestment in defense capabilities in Europe for a very long time. That is now being remedied in some cases, like Poland, very quickly, Germany also. In some cases, like France, not so quickly, or Italy, not so quickly. And so I think that does create a situation where you may have a military need and not have the capabilities to back it up. So that's the risk there. We have to close that gap, and we have to close it as quickly as possible. Now, on the question of will, this is very difficult. I'll come back to 2014. Ukraine, of course, was not a NATO member, but when Russia took over Crimea, the little green men, the hybrid operation, we were all telling Ukraine, don't fight back. Don't escalate, don't have a war with Russia, we'll take care of this. And of course, Putin saw that and immediately annexed Crimea, claimed to annex it, and started another war in eastern Ukraine. And so it should have been a lesson then that, okay, that is not the way to handle Putin or to handle Russian aggression. We again tried to urge restraint in the case of eastern Ukraine. We ended up with the Minsk agreements. And of course, that was a deeply flawed set of agreements that Russia never adhered to. And we never held Russia to account for that. So that's the background and the lesson we should be learning when we raise this question about the Baltic states or Poland. It's important that we not create that slippery slope again, that we show complete resolve.
Let's talk about Ukraine. There's an argument made that Ukraine should be rapidly integrated into the EU, down the line into NATO, because it is also an asset to Europe,
Yes.
not just a liability. First, I want to ask you, do you believe that Donald Trump is currently seeing Ukraine as more of a liability than an asset? Is he making a mistake?
Yeah. First off, Ukraine is an asset rather than a liability. And you can look at this in any number of ways. Militarily, certainly. Defense industry and innovation, certainly. Willingness to fight, the battle-hardened mindset of the population, certainly an asset as well. And then if you look at other areas, it has some of the most productive agriculture in the world. And I think that will actually be a benefit to Europe. I know Polish farmers are afraid of this, French farmers are afraid of this, but Ukraine is competitive globally and won't need subsidies from Europe, and it'll in fact be lowering prices, increasing availability, and being a good partner within Europe. Energy is another area. Ukraine has tremendous energy potential as a supplier for Europe. I think that is something that will help Europe meet its climate targets. It's going to help Europe have more resiliency in its electricity grid, in its energy grid. It's going to help support data centers that Europe is desperately going to be needing. So Ukraine is an asset in a lot of different ways. Now, President Trump tends to look at Ukraine and Russia's war against Ukraine as simply a matter of who's bigger. Who has power? And Russia's a bigger country, Ukraine's a smaller country, so obviously Russia's going to win. Obviously Ukraine should give something up and make peace, and you can't understand why they're not doing this. And that is making a huge mistake. Russia is not as powerful as Trump thinks. They are completely corrupt and disorganized and poorly led and poorly equipped and poorly trained, and they're not making progress on the battlefield. And moreover, this is a war of choice for Putin that even his own military and population is ambivalent about. Whereas for Ukraine, this is existential. They have got to defend their lives, their country, their territory, their families, and so on. And they've been remarkably determined and ingenious in how they have done that. So I think he's getting it wrong when he looks at the conflict as one that Ukraine is destined to lose. Conversely, I think Ukraine is destined to win. And the question is how long we drag it out. Do we make it harder, or do we help Ukraine and push for a solution sooner?
What do you make then of these calls, particularly from German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, for some kind of associate membership of the EU? Is that something that Ukraine would swallow? Is that something that would make sense?
Yeah, I think it only makes sense as a stepping stone. So what I've heard as an idea that I think does make sense is if you think about EU membership, you have all of these chapters, so all the EU acquis that every country has to adopt and implement and demonstrate that their markets and systems are functioning the way the EU countries should.
Including rule of law, of course.
Yeah, especially rule of law, but in all areas. And the EU enlargement process until now has been you do all of these, and then at the end of it, you become an EU member. But even then, there's a couple things that are still out there after that, like the Schengen Agreement and like the Euro. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you've done everything, but you've done enough that you said, okay, now it's membership. What you could do, if the European Union chose to, is say, okay, we need a couple of things that are vital, like rule of law and maybe energy and maybe something else, but we're going to declare membership at an earlier point. But Ukraine would not enjoy all of the benefits of being a member, and it would still be working to meet its obligations as a member through all of these other chapters that have not yet been completed. So it would just be a matter of defining a point in the process where we say they're an EU member, but they still have to do all the work.
So Chancellor Merz reportedly had this idea where you're at the table, you're not voting, but you have, for example, mutual defence clauses, so you would be protected under the EU's defence clauses. Does that make sense?
Only as an interim, not as an outcome.
Because so there has to be a vision towards
there has to be, because why would Ukraine do that? And say, okay, we're going to defend you and you're not going to do anything for us. It doesn't make sense. Ukraine is a European nation. It is part of a European family, and we all depend upon security of the continent. And so it makes sense to fold them in. Obviously, there are issues to work through, but creating an alternative to actual membership, whether it's the EU or NATO, in my mind, doesn't make sense.
And I spoke to the EU ambassador to Ukraine this week, who suggested that a creative solution needs to be found. You just pointed out all the chapters. I mean, it's merit-based for a reason.
Yep.
But in Ukraine's case, is there a real case to be made that there needs to be a creative solution?
There is a case to be made, and that is we will achieve a ceasefire at some point in this ongoing war. We have to prevent Putin from attacking again. And so everything we can do to layer on deterrence, this is where we started the conversation, we have to layer on deterrence so Putin doesn't attack once this conflict is concluded. And that would, in my mind, be militarily, so Ukraine has a strong military. We should be helping them. We should be funding, training, equipping, and integrating them. It should be economic. They should be getting stronger, more resilient, higher GDP, better tax base, able to pay their own bills, stronger energy sector because Putin has destroyed a lot of it. They can come roaring back in energy with the right investments. It should be membership in the institutions or progress toward that membership in the institutions, because all of these will be sending signals to Putin that it's too costly for him to start the war over.
And so I want to end then with Vladimir Putin. President Stubb has suggested it is time to talk, for Europe to talk directly to Vladimir Putin. Is it time for that to happen?
I don't object to that. We see President Trump speaking with Putin all the time. I'm not sure that the messages are fully understood on President Trump's side or his envoy's side. I'm not sure that messages that convey Europe's vital interests are conveyed in those conversations either. And so I think it's best for that Trump, Putin, or envoys to envoys. I don't think it's in Europe's interest for that to be the only channel of communication.
Ambassador Kurt Volker, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And that's all for this exclusive interview here from the GlobSec Forum in Prague. I'm Dahmen. Goodbye for now.